Anastasia Goodstein, and I currently am a VP of Interactive at the Ad Council. Are all of you sort of familiar with what the Ad Council is? If not, we run very large public service sort of PSA awareness campaigns for a whole host of different issues on behalf of either government agencies or nonprofit organizations, and all of the media that we get when they run is donated. So we don't pay anything for online advertising or TV advertising, billboards, radio, it's all donated media. But before my recent incarnation at the Advertising Council, I started and ran a site called YPulse, which was basically a blog covering youth culture for many years, starting in 2004. So I was kind of like a journalist on this beat and immersed in sort of, you know, the worlds of tweens and teens and technology day in and day out. So these issues are near and dear to me. And I also, before the Ad Council, you know, have worked in the nonprofit space. So actually starting at Teen Voices, which sadly shut down as a kind of a Boston-based institution, a magazine that was, you know, published girls' voices from all over the country and ran local mentoring programs with young adults and inner city teens here in Boston. I also recently did a stint for an organization called Inspire USA, which has a site called reachout.com, which deals with teens and mental health issues. So I wanted to kind of come at this issue from a totally different place of, you know, the nonprofit space and people who are dealing with this audience and, you know, wanting to get a message out around a lot of social issues that impact young people. And I'm also a musical fan, so you can see Hello 12, I don't know if everyone's chorus line, but, you know, for me it just feels like there is something arbitrary about 13 and COPPA when you're dealing with the issues that tweens and teens are encountering in their lives. It feels a little bit arbitrary when you're talking about bullying, for example, right? I mean, you can get bullied at starting at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can sadly be abused by a family member, or, you know, at 11, 12, you know, kids are starting to form these sort of early dating relationships, and those can go wrong. Under 13s can experience depression. I know we have a doctor person for that, right? I mean, so, you know, we've sadly, especially in the LGBT or, you know, under 13s who are beginning to question that and then get bullied and then get, you know, are depressed or get depressed and even attempt suicide. This happens at ages under 13. They're beginning to experiment with sex, you know, maybe not completely having sex yet, but doing all kinds of sexual things. And when they're living their lives online, and when online and online communities are sort of an extension of their whole psychosocial life, of course, these things are going to get talked about and very often shared in these spaces. You know, nonprofits are actually technically sort of accepted from COPPA. You know, in what I read, correct me if I'm wrong, they're sort of encouraged to comply. But I don't think many people in the nonprofit space, and especially smaller grassroots nonprofits, A, have the capacity and, you know, the sort of legal advice to truly, you know, comply with the spirit of it. And I don't even think a lot of people understand the spirit of it, and that it is about sort of marketing and online advertising. When I speak to people in the nonprofit space, there's just this sense of, there's this thing, and if you're going to go under 13, you're going to make your site for under 13s, and you have to, you know, do a lot of work to do it. So we're just going to make our site, you know, 13 and up, even if some of the content that's issue-oriented is really relevant and, you know, needed by kids who may be under 13. So a lot of what ends up happening is just, okay, so we're gonna, you know, we're gonna make our site for 13 and up, even if there are resources and information that's really important for these kids to have. But if we find out that somebody who registers on our site or shares that they're under 13, then we're going to try to comply because that's what we're supposed to do, and we're going to, delete their account or information or tell them that they can't be on the site and ask them to go somewhere else. So examples, one of the campaigns that the Ad Council has done was something around teen dating violence, and they did it with an agency called RGA, and it was an all-digital campaign, and they did a ton of research about the target audience, and they learned that, the young people that really need to know about this issue are actually, 11, 12, like right when they're just starting to think about those kinds of boyfriend-girlfriend dating types of relationships, to understand when it becomes unhealthy or potentially abusive. So in implementing the campaign, so the research said that you're going to need to sort of target younger, but of course in the implementation of the campaign, it was very much based around user submissions and creating an avatar and submitting things through the site. The decision was made to do it all through YouTube, right? So even though the target audience really was going to be some 11 and 12 under 13, the sort of out was to go through YouTube, put all of whatever compliance or non-compliance issues over there, and not have to worry about, moderating on the end of, actually creating the site and making sure that they're reaching their target audience. So that was sort of one way.
I think the terms of service for YouTube are 18, aren't they?
Well, in YouTube, anyone can obviously go view videos. You need to be over 13 to register. The challenge is that under 13s being on YouTube, a lot of that content just isn't appropriate. So it's not a COPPA issue so much, right? They comply technically with COPPA, but a lot of the content there isn't appropriate. So then when you drive young users there to view your content, they're also being driven to view whatever else is there.
Right, so they were submitting through YouTube and also submitting the comments through YouTube. So basically the whole registration process for this campaign, which was about teen dating violence prevention and targeting, essentially 7th and 8th graders.
It's not accessible.
Well, or, it was accessible to them because they go to YouTube and they lie about their age and upload the content, and that, this is just sort of an example of that's, how organizations deal with this issue when they're trying to do something around an issue like that. And the other example I was going to talk about was Reach Out, where, it's definitely a site for teens, but it has mental health information about a whole range of issues, everything from depression, anxiety, dealing with fighting with your parents. We have content that really could be relevant for anyone. But again, on the back end, it's a very small organization. If somebody did register and comment, and in their comment revealed that they were under 13, our policy was to send them a really nice email. We wish that there was another site that had, that was COPPA compliant, I guess, or geared towards a younger audience, and say, we love you and we wish you well, but technically you can't be on our site because of our terms of service.
But what if, on the other side, if they reach out and have a specific problem, do you try and respond? Because that's where we're at GBH, where we've got health education, but we're not medics. You do get kids writing to you because they trust you or because they know the characters on TV, whatever it is, and they tell you stuff that you would normally say, well, if you're a teacher, you'd have to tell, social services, there's
yeah.
What happens when you get something like that?
Yeah, if it was somebody who gave more of that information and they were, technically in danger of threatening to kill themselves, or we have a whole sort of set of escalation procedures for somebody like that. But if it was somebody who just sort of in a comment revealed, oh, I'm actually 10 and, my parents are or whatever, and they had created an account to write that comment, we had to sort of, even though we technically didn't, I guess, have to do it, but because we were in the spirit trying to comply, we would say, well, you can't really be on our site, and you can go somewhere else. And, a lot of commercial sites try to deal with these issues as well, right? They do campaigns around bullying or other sort of big social issues where they're asking the young people who are on their sites to sort of talk about these things. And if they're not a COPPA compliant site, we did a campaign with WeWorld, which is now, I think, in the process of becoming COPPA compliant, but it was all about bullying. We had tons of kids who revealed in the course of their commenting that they were not 13, but they're being bullied, et cetera, and we had to tell the folks at WeWorld that the person had revealed their age, and they had to then kick them off the site. So what I wanted to do by just sort of, talking about this was hopefully get into a little bit of discussion as I think we're gonna move into that space, but, bring up this sort of point of, should there be different recommendations around this for nonprofits? I mean, it's one thing to say you don't technically have to comply, but we encourage you to comply. I mean, is there almost like, for people who are targeting this audience but dealing with issues of...
For PBS, I mean, GBH PBS, we're nonprofit, but we don't want to be seen to be above the law. And we're also working through Apple and through even if we're giving, the app I mentioned was a free app, but you need to go through Apple together. I mean, I think it would be a very tricky path to say, well, we're still a non-profit, but we're using these commercial companies to distribute to commercial products, but at the end of it, it's still a non-profit. It's easy, even complicated as it is, it's easier for us to just to say, look, we understand the law, it applies to everyone, including us.
And remember, the only reason the reason for the non-profit exception for COPPA is that the Federal Trade Commission regulates interstate commerce. So it doesn't have anything to do with your subject matter or your good intentions. They just can't reach, they're just not authorized to reach you, right? Which is why they encourage but can't require.
Well, and I mean, requiring verified parental consent in a situation where a child's talking about their parent abusing them, it gets into this really sticky area where you're like, oh, okay. Like, escalation protocols for a situation of abuse are not to call the parent who the child just said was abusing them. So if the parent is the only...
Right, so so one of the questions becomes, well, COPPA is about collecting personal information from a child, right? So how much information do you need to be collecting in order to operate your service? And why do you need to collect that information, and what are you doing with it? So if you have a situation where a child is threatening or abused, you can actually, law enforcement can actually find that child without you having any information on them, right? Just by virtue of the fact that they've been on your site, they created an anonymous user ID. There's a lot that we can do to interact with users anonymously with nicknames and things of that sort that can, in a crisis situation, in an escalation situation, bring us to the same place, which is, getting some help to the child, right? Without involving their parent. So there are things that we can do to work around the idea that we have to collect this information from children in order to allow them to interact. But there's a balance, and it's certainly challenging when you're dealing with social issues, right? It's a challenging sort of line to navigate.
Right, and especially for organizations that don't have the resources of the GBH, but you want to create a community around a social issue. My question is sort of, how do you sort of do it in the spirit but also allow, kids to share about this and to access your information? And I think it also deters organizations who have important content that under 13s, 11, 12s may need from even framing it as, we have it for you, because they're nervous about what COPPA means.
Well,